Today I'm going to continue my reading of Aion, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self by C.G. Jung. I'm beginning on paragraph 105. Paragraph 105. Perhaps we may risk the conjecture that the problem of the Yahwistic God image, which had been constellated in men's minds ever since the book of Job, continued to be discussed in Gnostic circles and in syncretistic Judaism generally, all the more eagerly as the Christian answer to this question, namely the unanimous decision in favor of God's goodness, did not satisfy the conservative Jews. In this respect, therefore, it is significant that the doctrine of the two antithetical sons of God originated with the Jewish Christians living in Palestine. Inside Christianity itself, the doctrine spread to the Bogomils and Cathars. In Judaism, it influenced religious speculation and found lasting expression in the two sides of the Kabbalistic tree of the Sephiroth, which were named Hesed, love, and Din, justice. A rabbinical scholar, Zvi Verblovsky has been kind enough to put together for me a number of passages from the Hebrew literature which have bearing on this problem. This is a behind-the-scenes session, so there's no warranty. I do outtakes and so on, but you're welcome to listen along and ask questions if you have some. Paragraph 106. R. Joseph taught, "What is the meaning of the verse, and none of you shall go out at the door of his, and none of you shall go out at the door of his house until the morning." Exodus 12:22. Once permission has been granted to the destroyer, he does not distinguish between the righteous and the wicked. Indeed, he even begins with the righteous. Commenting on Exodus 33:5, quote, "If for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you," unquote. The Midrash says, quote, Yahweh means he could wax wroth. Yahweh means he could wax wroth with you for a moment, for that is the length of his wrath, as is said in Isaiah 26:20. Quote, "Hide yourselves for a little moment until the wrath is past," unquote, and destroy you. Yahweh gives warning here of his unbridled irascibility. If in this moment of divine wrath a curse is uttered, it will indubitably be effective. That is why Balaam, quote, who knows the thoughts of the Most High, when called upon by Balak to curse Israel, was so dangerous an enemy because he knew the moment of Yahweh's wrath. Paragraph 107. God's love and mercy are named his right hand, but his justice and his administration of it are named after his left hand. Thus we read in 1 Kings 22:19, quote, I shall, quote, outtake. Quote, I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him, on his right hand and on his left. The Midrash comments, is there right or left on high? The Midrash comments, is there right and left on high? This means that the intercessors stand on the right and the accusers on the left. The comment on Exodus 15:6, quote, Thy right hand, O Lord, glorious in power, thy right hand, O Lord, shatters the enemy, runs, quote, When the children of Israel perform God's will, they make the left hand his right hand. When they do not do his will, they make even the right hand his left hand. God's left hand dashes to pieces. His right hand is glorious to save. Paragraph 108. The dangerous aspect of Yahweh's justice comes out in the following passage. Even so said, quote, Even so, said the Holy One, blessed be he. If I create the world on the basis of mercy alone, its sins will be great. But on the basis of justice alone, the world cannot exist. Hence, I will create it on the basis of justice and mercy, and may it then stand. The Midrash on Genesis 18:23, Abraham's plea for Sodom, says, Abraham speaking, quote, If thou desirest the world to endure, there can be no absolute justice, while if thou desirest absolute justice, the world cannot endure. Yet thou wouldst hold the cord by both ends, desiring both the world and absolute justice. Unless thou forgoest a little, the world cannot endure, unquote. Paragraph 109. Yahweh prefers the repentant sinners even to the righteous, and protects them from his justice by covering them with his hand or by hiding them under his throne. Paragraph 110. With reference to Habakkuk 2:3, quote, For still the vision awaits its time. If it seems slow, wait for it, unquote. Our Jonathan says, Should you say, we wait for his coming? But he does not. It stands written, Isaiah 30:18. Therefore will the Lord wait, that he may be gracious unto you. But since we wait, and he waits too, what delays his coming? Divine justice delays it. It is in this sense that we have to understand the prayer of our Jonathan. Quote, May it be thy will, O Lord our God, to look upon our shame and behold our evil plight. Clothe thyself in thy mercies, cover thyself in thy strength, wrap thyself in thy loving kindness, and gird thyself with thy graciousness. And may thy goodness and gentleness come before thee. God is properly exhorted to remember his good qualities. There is even a tradition that God prays to himself. May it be my will that my mercy may suppress my anger, and that my compassion may prevail over my other attributes. This tradition is borne out by the following story. Quote, Our Ishmael, the son of Elisha, said, I once entered the innermost sanctuary to offer incense, and there I saw Akathriel, Yahweh Sabaoth, seated upon a high and exalted throne. He said to me, Ishmael, my son, bless me. And I answered him, May it be thy will that thy mercy may suppress thy anger, and that thy compassion may prevail over thy other attributes, so that thou mayest deal with thy children according to the attribute of mercy, and stop short of the limit of strict justice. And he nodded to me with his head. Unquote. It is not difficult to see from these quotations what was paragraph 111. It is not difficult to see from these quotations what was the effect of Job's contradictory God image. It became a subject for religious speculation inside Judaism, and, through the medium of the Kabbalah, it evidently had an influence on Jacob Boehme. In his writings, we find a similar ambivalence, namely the love and wrath fire of God, in which Lucifer burns forever. Thank you for joining me. I'm reading a few paragraphs of Aion, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self, by C.G. Jung. Paragraph 112. Since psychology is not metaphysics, no metaphysical dualism can be derived from or imputed to its statements concerning the equivalence of opposites. It knows that equivalent opposites are necessary conditions inherent in the act of cognition, and that without them no discrimination would be possible. It is not exactly probable that anything so intrinsically bound up with the act of cognition should be at the same time a property of the object. It is far easier to suppose that it is primarily our consciousness which names and evaluates the differences between things, and perhaps even creates distinctions where no differences are discernible. This is a behind the scenes reading from Aion, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self, by C.G. Jung. Aion, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self, by C.G. Jung. Please note that there is a detailed playlist on this YouTube channel where the beginning of this book and Dr. Edward Edinger's book, The Aion Lectures, can be found read up to this point. Paragraph 113. I have gone into the doctrine of the privatio boni at such length because it is in a sense responsible for a too optimistic conception of the evil in human nature, and for a too pessimistic view of the human soul. To offset this, early Christianity, with unerring logic, balanced Christ against an antichrist. For how could you speak of high if there is no low, or right if there is no left, or right if there is no left, or good if there is no bad, and the one is as real as the other? Only with Christ did a devil enter the world as the real counterpart of God, and in early Jewish Christian circles, Satan, as already mentioned, was regarded as Christ's elder brother. There's an interesting footnote here, but I'm going to come back to it. Paragraph 114. But there is still another reason why I must lay such critical stress on the privatio boni. As early as Basel, we meet with the tendency to attribute evil to the disposition of the soul, and at the same time to give it a non-existent character. Since according to this author, evil originates in human frivolity, and therefore owes its existence to mere negligence, it exists, so to speak, only as a byproduct of psychological oversight, and this is such a quantité negligible that evil vanishes altogether in smoke. Frivolity as a cause of evil is certainly a factor to be taken seriously, but it is a factor that can be got rid of by a change of attitude. We can act differently if we want to. Psychological causation is something so elusive and seemingly unreal that everything which is reduced to it inevitably takes on the character of futility or of a purely accidental mistake, and is thereby minimized to the utmost. It is an open question how much of our modern undervaluation of the psyche stems from this prejudice. This prejudice is all the more serious in that it causes the psyche to be suspected of being the birthplace of all evil. The Church Fathers can hardly have considered what a fatal power they were ascribing to the soul. One must be positively blind not to see the colossal role that evil plays in the world. Indeed, it took the intervention of God himself to deliver humanity from the curse of evil, for without his intervention, man would have been lost. If this paramount power of evil is imputed to the soul, the result can only be a negative inflation, i.e., a demonic claim to power on the part of the unconscious, which makes it all the more formidable. This unavoidable consequence is anticipated in the figure of the Antichrist and is reflected in the course of contemporary events, whose nature is in accordance with the Christian Aion of the fishes, now running to its end. Okay. All right, that's all the paragraphs I'm going to read today, but let me just emphasize these last couple of sentences. If this paramount power of evil is imputed to the soul, the result can only be a negative inflation, i.e. a demonic claim to power on the part of the unconscious, which makes it all the more formidable. This unavoidable consequence is anticipated in the figure of the Antichrist and is reflected in the course of contemporary events, whose nature is in accord with the Christian Aion of the fishes, now running to its end. I'm going to read a couple of footnotes here. I guess just one. Let's see what it's referring to. Okay, footnote. Dr. Jung is talking about the problem of opposites, and he says, my learned friend Victor White, O.P., in his Dominican studies, thinks he can detect a Manichaean streak in me. I don't go in for metaphysics, but ecclesiastical philosophy undoubtedly does. And for this reason, I must ask, what are we to make of hell, damnation, and the devil if these things are eternal? Theoretically, they consist of nothing, and how does that square with the dogma of eternal damnation? But if they consist of something, that something can hardly be good. So where is the danger of dualism? In addition to this, my critics should know how very much I stress the unity of the self, this central archetype, which is a complexio oppositorum par excellence, and that my leanings are therefore toward the very reverse of dualism. Okay. So, Dr. Jung was justifying his position. Now, let's see what time it is. I have Dr. Edward Edinger's The Aion Lectures, and what I have been doing in this series on Aion and the Aion Lectures is reading passages side by side of the two books, because Dr. Edinger makes it a little easier to understand what Dr. Jung was saying. So I'll add this reading. It's only a page and a half. Okay, so I'm reading from the Aion Lectures by Dr. Edward Edinger, Exploring the Self in C.G. Jung's Aion. I'm on page 56. In Jung's chapter on Christ as a symbol of the self, he makes reference to Hippolytus in his book, Elenchus, or The Refutation of All Heresies. This work is also sometimes referred to as Philosophemena. Hippolytus was one of the early Christian fathers and lived from approximately 170 to 236. He was a presbyter at Rome, and he wrote a very comprehensive treatise refuting the Gnostic heresies. In the course of attacking them, he described them all in considerable detail. As a result, his work is one of our best sources for the understanding of Gnosticism, which was not his intention. There may just be careful what you ask for, or be careful what you do. As a result, his work is one of our best sources for the understanding of Gnosticism, which was not his intention. There may be a psychological lesson to be learned from this, you think? The early Christian fathers hated the Gnostics with a passion, and they searched out and destroyed all the Gnostic writings until the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library in 1945. We had practically no original writings of the Gnostics at all. What was known to them came from what the Christian heresy hunters said about them, and even Hippolytus's refutation was lost. It was only rediscovered in 1842, when a manuscript of it was found in the library of a monastery on Mount Athos, on the island of an island off Greece. I think it is very significant that the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library occurred in the 20th century, and the discovery of Hippolytus's work on the heresies only took place in the 19th century. There is an historical synchronicity in these phenomena. There is an historical synchronicity in these phenomena. To turn to Jung's material in the last part of this chapter, let us first take up the subject of the paradoxical Yahwistic God image. In his previous discussion, Jung quoted the pseudo-Clementine homilies, which described a God image incorporating good and evil as the right and left hands of God. Jung noted that this text was linked to Jewish Christians. He then turns to the Yahwistic God image, which was being elaborated in Judaism at about the same time. A few of Jung's examples, an accumulation from various Jewish sources belonging to the first 2 or 3 centuries AD, illustrate the idea of the paradoxical Yahwistic God image. Referring to the occasion of the Exodus, quote, once permission has been granted to the destroyer, he does not distinguish between the righteous and the wicked. Indeed, he even begins with the righteous. Paragraph 106. He's referring to Dr. Jung's paragraph 106. This refers to the avenging angel that executed the Egyptian firstborn. The destroyer does not distinguish between the righteous and the wicked. Indeed, he even begins with the righteous. So you had better stay out of sight on that particular night. Another text says that you should hide yourselves at the moment of Yahweh's wrath, because we are warned by him that at the moment of his unbridled irascibility, if a curse is uttered, it will indeed be effective. In other words, you had better be very careful what you say and what is said to you at the particular moment when God's wrath is kindled. Mm-hmm. Another text says, quote, God's left hand dashes to pieces, his right hand is glorious to save. Paragraph 107. These quotations illustrate forcefully just what is meant by the paradoxical Yahwistic God image, and these images have direct psychological application. For instance, the remark that a curse uttered at the moment of divine wrath will be effective would refer to the psychological fact that if there has been a serious offense committed such that the Yahweh level of the psyche is activated, what takes place at that moment has extraordinary power and consequences. The statement that the destroyer does not distinguish between the righteous The statement that the destroyer does not distinguish between the righteous and the wicked corresponds to the psychological fact that the wrath of the self is an unconscious phenomenon. It is a force of nature. A tornado does not distinguish between the righteous and the wicked. It might even hit the righteous first. The same applies to the activated self. Okay, so Gray's here. Hi, Gray. Yeah, yep. I'm trying to move on with my readings of Aion, and I've been pushed along by our friend Barbara on that. And so I'm going to discontinue this right now, and I hope the football team's doing well, and I'm going to go to lighter stuff now and go to the movie Christopher Robin with my mother-in-law. So that should be fun and a lot different from reading Jung and Edinger. So anyway, it's a pleasure to see you. Thanks, Sam, for coming and taking the time to look in on us. I'm going to discontinue for now. Thank you. Bye.